Good morning, all. It is great to be back with you. Again, my name is Stephanie Erdis. I'm the Associate Director at MCASA, and I was here for your first training, your first live webinar last Monday. So I'm back today with one of our former SALI advocates. So Claire, do you want to give an introduction of yourself to our participants?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. My name is Claire Nicole. I used to be a SALI legal advocate who worked along these wonderful people. And thankfully, I still have an opportunity to come back for SAVAT specifically, just to talk through economic empowerment with staff a little bit.
Great. It's always great to have Claire presenting. And so I always love presenting this session with her. So we are glad to be here with you this morning. I know that you are in the last couple live webinars of this program, and I actually get to be with you all the rest of them today, tomorrow afternoon, and on Friday. So today we are going to talk about economic empowerment for survivors. So as we get started, I want you to take a look at these questions. And if your first name begins with the letters A through F, I really want you to think about what you would do with 200 extra $1,000. If someone gave you a stack of cash or a check, if you prefer, of $200,000, what would you do with it? And this doesn't have to be like a really philosophical answer. This can also be like the first thing that comes to you. You can be like, oh my gosh, I would do blank with $200,000 in my life. If your first name begins with G through N, what would you do with 10 extra $1,000 a year? So if you got 10 extra $1,000 a year, not a new job, nothing changed about your current situation, but you just had 10 extra $1,000 a year. So say January 1st, you get 10,000 bucks every year. What would you do with that money each year? Like what would you do with that money in your life? And then if your first name begins with the letters O through Z, what would you do with 850 extra dollars a month? So just think about this as we go through the beginning of this presentation. We're going to come back to these questions. But what would you do with this type of extra money? 200 extra $1,000, $10,000 a year, or 850 extra dollars a month? What would that look like in your life? And then we'll come back to that, but ponder those questions a little bit. You might want to write it down. You might not need to write it down because maybe you've fantasized about winning the lottery or having extra money. I know that's a game we like to play when the lottery is high in my house. What would we do with blank amount of money? So yeah, think about that. So today we're going to talk about economic empowerment. So we start off with what would you do with some money, but we really are going to focus on survivors and some of the resources and some of the skills of talking to them about money. So again, we want this presentation to be interactive. Claire and I don't hold all of the information in this space. And we would like us all to be learning from each other today. These are some of the important objectives to keep in mind so that you can prepare for today's topic. You will both learn foundational information in this workshop, but also Claire's going to go over some practical skills of working with clients. So we're going to describe the economic cost of sexual assault to survivors. What's the actual dollar total? There has been some science behind this, so we're going to talk about that. We're going to understand the role social and institutional inequities play in a survivor's financial security and understand financial abuse and the tactics abusers use to impact a survivor's financial security. And then Claire's going to talk about developing strategies for discussing money with clients, and then developing strategies for cultivating financial stability and safety for clients facing economic challenges. So what does that actually look like for us today? So why does this training matter? Like why do we put this right in the middle of our sexual assault victim advocate training? And we kind of like to start off by saying and really acknowledging that we live in a society where people are taught not to talk about money. Money can be a very taboo subject. which therefore leads to survivors and their families not feeling safe to engage in conversations about money. Or people might not fully be aware of their financial situation or the opportunities available to them to assist with their financial situation. So I was thinking about this morning. So oftentimes, um, it is not, we talk about this at MCASA. My staff and the folks that I work with and other colleagues at MCASA have heard me say this a lot. It's not a survivor's responsibility to know all the things. It's not surprising that a survivor might not know all of their resources. They weren't planning on being a survivor of sexual assault. Like, this is something that they weren't planning on doing. This is something that should happen to no one. And so it's not their job to understand everything about the legal system, everything about the resources available to them, everything about mental health and counseling. It is our job as advocates to know and understand those systems and resources and then help them navigate it in the best way for them, like letting them make the decisions, but us being able to share this information with them. And I want to share a story over the weekend. I had the opportunity to go to World Pride in DC. So DC's Pride event this year was World Pride. So it had people from all over the world at their event, and MCASA had a table there. And so I talked to several people from different states that were visiting DC for this Pride event. And so because they weren't from Maryland, I would say, well, every state has a sexual assault coalition. Every single person I said that to was surprised. They did not know there was a sexual assault coalition in their state. That's not surprising. They didn't work in sexual violence or prevention or domestic violence or interpersonal violence. So it's not surprising, but it really underlines for me as someone who works in this space that it's my job to know the things and to be able to help help survivors advocate through that system for themselves or help me or have me help them um, with understanding the systems and the things that are available to them. So that is one of the reasons we talk about this, because money is something and financial resources are something that we don't often know enough about or share enough about. And we know that this silence and lack of awareness is a direct result of inequality and oppression. We have the tools to empower survivors and their communities to receive the financial support they need. And I'm really always excited and passionate about this training because it gave me a way to quantify what I was seeing in the field when I did direct service work. And it will give you some tools to use as you work with survivors and help them get some economic stability. So these are the things we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about that economic impact and we're going to have some poll questions. We're going to talk to survivor. We're going to talk about talking to survivors about money and have a bit of a group discussion about that. Claire's going to share some information about the Sexual Assault Legal Institute. I know you met with some of those folks last week as they did their presentation, but it's always good to refresh when we're talking about a new topic and how SALI can help. And then we'll have time for some questions at the end. So let's jump right into, I've teased this a little bit. What is the actual economic impact of sexual violence? And I want to give a strong emotional reaction warning here. That if this topic is new to you, if you're like, oh, I actually never thought about how much this costs survivors, it may bring on some strong emotions and reflection and reactions as we really talk about this. It can make advocates and survivors, if you yourself are a survivor, feel angry or frustrated or upset or really kind of sad about your own situation or situations that you've seen with other survivors. So as always, we encourage you to take care of yourself during this moment. And if you have to step away, we are recording this. So you will have these slides and this recording to refer back to if you need to. So we have a poll question. So I'm going to see if this is actually in. Oh, yes. Excellent. Oh, thanks. Alyssa is always on it. So if you want to answer this poll question, how often is money a barrier? So for those of you that work with survivors, when a survivor discloses to you, or is there seeking your services, or you're talking to them about what happened, how often do you find that money is a barrier or factor for them receiving the support, resources, services, or healing or justice that they want or need? For example, they might say they can't afford counseling or they can't leave an abuser because they're financially controlled by that abuser. They might be afraid to report or seek services because they're afraid of how much that might cost them. Even if you know that it doesn't cost them anything, they're, like I said, survivors don't know the whole system of sexual assault prevention and response, particularly response. So they might have some misconceptions about how much things cost or what it will cost them. So go ahead and answer this question, talking about how often money is a barrier. I'll leave this poll up here for just a few seconds more. And then for those of you that are saying money isn't a barrier, we're going to have another poll question for you. So it looks like about 71% of you, we're going to end this poll and share the results. About 71% of you are saying that every individual or most individuals that you are working with are saying that money is some kind of barrier or factor. That's not surprising at all. Like we'll talk about some financial abuse and we'll talk about some other things that are cost to survivors. Um, so we have another poll question too about if money is not a factor. So if you were like, actually, money's not a factor, let's talk about that too. Why is it not a factor? Is it because survivors in your community generally have the means to pay for what they need? Is it that all services that a survivor could need in your community have no cost, that they can access all of that for free and no cost to themselves? Does money just never come up in conversations with working for survivors? And if you've been working with survivors for a while and you're like, oh my gosh, I never thought of this, don't I want you to try to maybe release any like shame or worry you have about that. You're going to learn a lot in this presentation that you can now incorporate and talk about it more. Or is money always just a barrier? So let me give you a couple more seconds. I'm going to take a sip of my tea and have you finish out this poll. And it looks like a lot of I'm going to end this poll and share the results with you all. It looks like for a lot of you, we're still reporting that money's always a barrier. Like that's always something we're dealing with. And the second most popular reason is that all the services that a survivor could need in your community are at no cost. So if they find you or your organization, you are able to give them a lot of financial help and stability, which is great to hear. And so we're going to elaborate on that throughout this presentation. So where did my arrows go? They're there. Okay, so let's talk about how much it costs to be a sexual assault survivor. So many people do not know how much of a barrier money can pose to survivors of sexual assault. When someone chooses to commit sexual violence, that doesn't just leave the person physically and emotionally wounded. And we've talked a lot about that over the last week and a half. But we're talking today about how it can affect them in other ways, particularly including their financial stability. So research has shown that the financial cost of being a sexual assault survivor is incredibly high. The CDC commissioned some mathematicians and worked with them over a period of time to actually come up with these totals that you see on the screen. So in the library, in our sexual assault victim advocate training library on the website, you can access the full article that talks about this research. It is about 10 years old. So as you're looking at these, you can kind of do your own math to estimate up on some of these, because these are the figures that they came up with in about 2016. So likely today, these would be a little bit more. So this research found that when someone survives rape or attempted rape, so they don't even have to have survived rape, it could just be an attempted rape, they are estimated to lose over $120,000 over their lifetime. For someone who survived childhood sexual abuse, that cost is almost $300,000. And nationally, these economic costs include costs related to healthcare, mental health care, productivity, higher education, childcare, a whole list of reasons and like reasons that they are kind of losing this money out of their lifetime earnings. These costs can add up for our society as a whole as well. And if you combined all victims of sexual assault in the United States, the lifetime cost for the country is 3.1 trillion for loss of productivity from employees, criminal justice intervention, and healthcare. And you'll see the breakdown here in each one of those categories. But I just want to point out $1.2 trillion in medical care, $1.6 trillion in lost productivity. These are huge, huge, huge numbers. And like I said, you can find this study in the SAVAT library on the SAVAT training website. So I want you to think about what we as a society would do with $3.1 trillion. So if sexual assault ended this month, like if we didn't have any more after June of 2025, this we'd have 100 to 300 trillion dollars back in our national budget. And there's been a lot of talk in the last 6 months about our national budget and tariffs and debt. Think about what this country would do with another trillion, another $3 trillion. I know if I was running the country, what I would do with another $3 trillion. So I want you to think about what that would be as well. So we're going to go back to those questions that I asked you at the beginning. And I'm going to try to pull up the chat, and Alyssa and Claire can help me as well. But if you are, so for the first category, if your first name began with A through F, what would you do with $200,000 over your lifetime? If someone gave you $200,000 today, what would you do with it? Go ahead and put that in the chat. Someone put putting it in savings. Cool. Paying off bills, food, donations. Yeah, I love this. I love this. Like Dennis like has a full breakdown of what he would do with $200,000. I feel like he thought about this before here. So thank you so much for sharing it. He first of all, he's donating $25,000 right off the bat. I want to share this, Dennis. So thank you so much for putting this in it. 50,000 is going in savings, $100,000 in investment, and retire in 4 years at 50. Amen, Dennis. Good plan. Excellent. We get a lot of save, invest. Absolutely. So if your first name starts with V through N, what would you do with 10 extra $1,000 a month? What are we doing with 10 extra $1,000? So, or not a $10,000 a month. Wouldn't that be great? $10,000 a year. And you can do like this isn't any kind of quiz. You can do fun things. If you're like, listen, if I had 10 extra $1,000 a year, I would put in a hot tub. Completely legit answer. Like that's totally fine too. I get a lot of people talking about paying off bills. Invest, donate, um, paying off bills, investing. Excellent.
I also love that some folks are referencing like specific things that they have either had happen recently or that are on like their to-do list right now, because that's also really representative of where some people are when they face financial hardship too. Like some people need home repairs to get done, or some people experience like uh, I think someone said they were recently in a car accident and like having that extra money would be useful to go towards a new vehicle or things like that. Like it can be fun, but also acknowledging like there are things that come out of necessity because life happens, and having that additional resource would be amazing to be able to help with those things. And on the flip side, if you are losing access to those resources or you are experiencing some of those costs of experiencing violence, like life still happens. So I love that people are like being transparent about like, yeah, these things just happen. I would love to deal with that.
Yeah. Oh, thanks so much for pointing that out, Claire. I see along those lines paying for college tuition for children. I see that for someone who had the $800, providing food, hotel for all of victims in a month. It also is surprising to me, like $850 a month is a lot for like one person, but in the scheme of things, $850 goes really fast. But it also could go really far as being able to help people. Oh, I have to share this last one. Start an animal shelter. I love it. I love it. If you ever get this $200,000, 10,000 or 800 a month, call me and I'll help you with this animal shelter because that's one of my dreams as well. Um, so thank you all for, engaging in this activity with your authenticity and with your, showing up as your own selves. Like, what would you do with this money? And we do this activity so we can really demonstrate this is life-changing money. This is not this is not trivial for sexual assault survivors. And some of you may be experiencing this in your own life as a sexual assault survivor, or know other people, or because you're working in this field, may also feel this economic crunch. So we really like to talk about this in the terms of like how big of an impact it really has on folks. So, what are the costs to sexual assault survivors? And I will start this slide by saying it's vast. There's all kinds of different things. Each sexual assault is unique to that person, and they all have different circumstances. So these are some things that they may share, but there could be other costs that we haven't even thought about yet. So when working with survivors, have kind of an open mind and some open dialogue about what costs they may be encountering. It may be something that we've not even thought about. So I divided this into 5 categories, and some of them you might have already kind of guessed. But things in the work category that cost survivors are things like lost wages for unpaid leave that they might have to take because of the assault, or underemployment. So they may have left a job, particularly if their sexual assault happened as related to work, a colleague, a supervisor, a client. They may leave that job suddenly, not reporting the sexual assault, and then end up in a job where they are getting paid less, or their skills that they have trained for are not being used. That can happen even if the person wasn't sexually assaulted related to work, but it also is likely if they did experience a sexual assault related to their employment. The other one I like to always point out in this category, and you can read those categories, everything on your own. I just like to point out a couple, is the loss of development opportunities. So think about in your own career, or maybe the career of someone close to you, a sibling or a friend or a spouse. Sometimes you get really great opportunities to go to conferences or work on special projects or travel with work. MCASA is working this month on getting some travel funds together to send some folks to California for the National Sexual Assault Conference. For a sexual assault survivor, these opportunities may be cut off from them because they don't feel comfortable traveling, or they don't feel comfortable staying in a hotel, or they're experiencing some PTSD symptoms, or some things that would prevent them from being able to take advantage of that. And that could also prevent them from being able to seek other opportunities in an organization or the field, or it can hamper their ability to network and take on big projects. So I don't want to underestimate that, like, them not being able to go to a conference is just not a big deal, because it really, really is. And it can really impact their employment and their career as they kind of move forward in that. Education, there can be lots of things, especially if someone was assaulted in high school or college, that can impact their education and their ability to pursue a career that they were interested in. So skipping or withdrawing from a course or a class can impact their ability to graduate on time. They might drop out and be forced out of school, or be forced into a homeschooling situation that they didn't want to do because of a sexual assault, especially if it was related to their high school or college career. They might transfer schools, which can be really expensive. And the one thing I want to point out is they might not graduate if they are in college or in an advanced program after high school. They might drop out of that program, and college debt is not forgivable. So they will still be on the hook for every loan that they took out, even if they don't graduate from college. You cannot get rid of college debt. Even dying does not get rid of college debt. So like, they will still have to pay that. And for some of them, they pay that for decades without achieving that degree or that career that they set out to. In the health category, some of these things you may kind of already really understand, like some mental health services, but things like injury or STI testing can also cost a survivor. There are methods for them to get that for free, but not all of them know that. Like, a survivor might not know that. So these costs could really add up. Also, I like to talk about this access category to make sure we're really kind of fully understanding what a survivor's experience might be. They may have costs associated with childcare if they have to go to court or meetings or doctor's appointments or mental health counseling appointments. They may have a higher housing cost. Sometimes survivors leave their residence if they are renting before their lease is up, and that can have penalties when they move to a new place, or that can have poor tenant history, which can impact them. Legally, survivors can break leases without penalty, but they have to know they can do that. And so that's where we come in as advocates, making sure that we can assist them in knowing what their rights and what their options are so they can try to have to minimize these access costs. The other category, we could put a bunch of things in here, but they may have property damage. And I can give you an example. I worked with a survivor whose abuser lit her car on fire. And so then she was without a car. And that was a huge power and control move, because if she didn't have a car, then she was really, really stuck in this relationship and in this housing situation with the survivor. She was able to get out of that situation, but the property damage was not covered by anything. She had to put up the new cost for a new vehicle to be able to have access to that. And she luckily had some support from some family and friends that made that possible, but that's not possible for all survivors. They may have costs associated with moving. If anybody has ever moved, you know it's expensive. So moving, debt, legal fees, all of those things can really start to add up. Poor credit history. One of the things that when I worked with survivors in direct service that they would often run into is if they had a sexual assault forensic exam, sometimes some of their stuff was collected for evidence. It would be winter coats, shoes, bedding. So to replace that stuff is expensive. And even if they can get reimbursed down the line, at that moment, they need access to funding, or they may go into debt for that, whether that's credit card debt or another kind of debt to just replace their stuff. Can be something that really costs them. So we like to give survivors a voice as much as we can in our training, which can be really difficult. But we have this video where you will hear directly from survivors about how their sexual assault affected them in the workplace and affected their income after the assault. So I'm going to play this. I will say on some computers, the volume's a little low. So be prepared to turn up your volume on your computer if you're having trouble hearing it.
It actually was hard to actually just get a job. It's hard to, go out there and sell yourself and say, I'm a great, I'm a great hard worker, because people will be like, well, I haven't even been working for 2 years. And then, you can't actually say, well, that's because I was raped in 2008.
There was also about a 3-year period when I just felt absolutely exhausted. I found it very difficult to get out of bed. I found it very difficult to get on with my life, and I didn't want often to be out in the world.
So my career took a complete left turn, or right turn, I'm not sure, but my turn, let's start that over again. My career took a complete turn as a result of the rape. I mean, prior to that, I was actually a film producer, and I'd been working, pretty busy, active life for a small film production company, and it was exciting stuff. We were shortlisted for the Oscars. I went to the Oscars. The post-traumatic stress disorder, the anxiety, the depression, the complete lack of energy I had after the assaults totally robbed me of my ability to work as effectively. So I had to leave my job.
The amount of brain space that getting out of bed in the morning, getting clothes on, doing the day-to-day of life suddenly became completely impossible.
It was actually years before I was able to work again. I wasn't able to go back to the previous job. I wasn't able to find a job afterwards.
I ended up quitting without having anywhere to go in terms of a job. And just, it was just very difficult to deal with those things at the same time. I was trying to phone various people, organisations like Women's Aid and Rape Crisis, because I didn't want to do that at home, because I was still with my ex. I'd be doing that sort of like in meetings room, trying to be as quiet as possible. I'd be going to the toilets and crying and that kind of thing, and trying to hide it.
I call that year my zombie year, because I was pretty much a zombie.
And of course this had an effect on my career. When once I'd been very energetic and very driven, I found it much harder to get the kind of energy that I needed to go forward and to make work.
It's not just that you're crying all the time. You're crying all the time because you don't have a career, and because you literally feel like you're devoid of your own personality as a result of the assault. And it affects the way you trust people in your relationships, and because your career is affected, it affects your finances, which can then have a massive impact, 5-10 years later, because you can't buy property.
At the moment, we're seeing a way of talking about mental health in the workplace where it's starting to become allowed to be able to talk about depression, but coming out and disclosing to your employer that you've been the victim of a sexual trauma is still full of taboo and stigmatized. And the number of women who have told me that they have lost their jobs as a result of disclosing it's just mind-boggling, and it's not right.
Friends, I'm going to try to get to our next slide here.
It actually...
There we go. I apologize for the technical glitch there. But we've been using that video for a couple of years now when we do this, because I think it's a really good summary, really hard to hear, but really good summary of some of the things that people experience. And I want to make a comment too about what the woman said at the end. She was talking about the amount of women that lose their jobs when they disclose or talk about sexual assault. And I think she's speaking from her own experience. But what we know at MCASA, and what many of you may know in your fields or where you're working, is that men and non-binary people are also losing those jobs. So she spoke to the experience of women, but I want to really highlight the experience of men and non-binary folks and others that are also losing their job and really suffering financially because of their sexual assault. This isn't just women. So I want to talk about, as I kind of wrap up my next couple of slides, financial abuse. So not only does the cost of healing services and justice services rack up for a survivor, they may also be victims of financial abuse. So we talked about intimate partner sexual violence last week when Tony from the Maryland Network Against Domestic Violence visited us to do a training. And so she might have touched on some of this, but I want to put it in the context of this training as well. So this can really impact the economic stability of a survivor, and financial and economic abuse occur when an abuser controls their victim's access to shared or individual assets, concealing information from them. They might limit their current or future potential for earnings. And it is one of the most powerful methods for keeping a survivor trapped in an abusive relationship. And it deeply diminishes, and I use the word deeply there on purpose, because it can really, really affect a survivor's ability to stay safe after leaving a dangerous situation. So research indicates that financial abuse occurs in 99% of domestic violence cases. And as you may have remembered from last week, 75% of women in domestic violence shelters report experiencing at least one incident of sexual violence during the past year in their domestic violence relationship. So there's a huge overlap between sexual assault survivors that are in domestic violence relationships and how money may impact them. So surveys of survivors reflect that concerns over the ability to provide financially for themselves and their children are the top reason for staying or returning to an abusive partner. So let's look at some of the ways an abusive partner, an abusive person, might financially or economically abuse someone beyond abusing them sexually. So these could be employment-related abuses. So there's many of them, but one of the top ones is preventing the survivor from going to work, or demanding that they quit their job, or preventing them from looking for jobs or attending job interviews. So they could cause the survivor to lose their job by physically harming them, or physically harming them prior to an important meeting or an important interview. They could harass the survivor at work and sabotage the work or employment opportunities by stalking or harassing the survivor in their workplace. So there are many more, but those are just a couple of examples. Coerced debt is also one, and it's also one we don't often talk about, but there's a huge long list of ways that someone can be abused related to debt, including having the abuser apply for credit cards or loans or opening other accounts in the survivor's name without their knowledge or consent. Think about how easy it is to open a credit card. So sometimes you don't need that much information about someone to do it. And because we do so much online with our money these days, and for the last 20 years, you don't have to show up in person to do those things. So it can be very easy to do this and abuse someone's trust or someone's ability, or someone's having information about you to open up a credit card. They might also do this by maybe the survivor knows about this. Maybe they force them to obtain loans, or they forge financial documents. They could refuse to pay bills and ruin the person's credit, the survivor's credit. They could run up large amounts of debt on joint accounts, or generate unauthorized debt, or they could force the survivor to turn over public benefits or threaten to turn the survivor in for cheating or misusing benefits, that could get the survivor in a lot of trouble financially, by doing things like filing false insurance claims. Let's talk a little bit about withholding access. So it's not necessarily abuse if in a relationship one person does a lot of the money stuff. Some of you might be in relationships where you're like, yeah, I kind of just, my paycheck goes into our joint account. My partner handles bills and, like our debit card and our credit card, and we have a good relationship around that. That's not abusive. There are lots of people out there. I had a dear friend a couple of years ago, maybe 20, 25 years ago. She said that she was just a spender. She likes spending money. And so her husband, her spouse at the time, kind of controlled all of their money and gave her a little bit of an allowance. And so, of course, I hear allowance with my friend and I'm like, oh, this is abusive. And she's like, no, it's absolutely needed. I like to spend money. So it's good that we have boundaries. And she's like, it's really healthy. We have conversations about it. And we have conversations about big purchases. And so he helps us save for those. So that was a really healthy way to do it. But there's also ways that if you have access to information or you're controlling all of the financial information, that somebody can withhold that information and that can become really abusive. So they can prevent you from accessing information or records or documents. They can do things like change passwords to online banking accounts or online credit card accounts. They can make investment decisions without talking to the survivor about it, putting all of their money at risk. They can hide assets from the survivor or refuse to pay child support or manipulate divorce proceedings so that they are not disclosing information about their finances, so that those calculations can't be done accurately. So those are a couple of ways of withholding access to information about money that can be abusive. And then other forms of economic abuse might include deciding when and how a survivor can access or use cash, bank accounts, or credit cards in a way that feels abusive, or like the survivor is being denied something as a punishment, forcing the survivor to give the abuser money, ATM, or credit card. The other way I saw this happen, this other form of financial abuse, is I worked with college students for a really long time, and sometimes their abusive partner would demand to take their ID, and they would use their student ID, which can function as a debit card or an access card or a key card in many, many places on campus. So they would take that and they would abuse that, and then the person that they were abusing or in a relationship with could get in trouble by the school and be fined for misuse of their ID card. So I saw that a lot as a way of someone kind of financially abusing someone else's assets. And so that's what I mean about like thinking really broadly when you're working with a survivor about all of the ways that they might be taken advantage of or abused in these ways. So I want you to, we're going to take a little pause here, and I want you to write in the chat, as an advocate or someone that's starting your advocacy career, what are some examples of financial abuse that you have seen with survivors that you work with or survivors you know, or you are welcome to, at your own comfort level, share some things that you might have experienced. And you don't even have to say that you experienced them, but what are some other things related to financial abuse that you have seen in your time working in sexual assault response, or some things you might predict that you will see working with survivors? So go ahead and post that in the chat. I am going to talk about our next slide, and then I'm going to come back to the chat to look at some of those examples of financial abuse that you've seen. So I want to wrap up our conversation talking about inequities that contribute to economic disparity for underserved populations. So particularly BIPOC, disabled people, the LGBTQ community, immigrants, and others that experience oppression in our society, they can face great financial hardships. And the prevalence of sexual assault increases as annual household income decreases. So survivors with marginalized identities often fall through the cracks when seeking support services, or they don't seek support services at all. So for you as advocates and service providers, it's important for you to understand so that you and your organization can work to reduce these barriers. So underserved populations are already experiencing barriers to economic attainment without adding the extra layer of survivorship. And some of those examples are the wage gap, which affects mostly women and especially women of color. So it's where job fields with more women are typically lower paid. Workplace and school harassment of LGBTQ students, so affecting their education or their ability or feeling comfortable or safe at work. Research has found a strong association between food and housing insecurity and intimate partner and sexual violence. LGBTQ youth experiencing homelessness at a higher rate than other youth, and how that can affect their economic empowerment. And while we know that people who are living in poverty, who are homeless, and who are incarcerated are more likely to experience sexual violence, we know too that those folks are disproportionately people of color, people with disabilities, and people in the LGBTQ community. People from underserved populations experience so many barriers to economic security, while at the same time being more at risk for being victims of sexual violence in their lifetime. So all of these layers of trauma, violence, and oppression intersect with economic insecurity. This is why this training is so important, to continue exploring new ways to serve survivors who are experiencing injustice and stress from so many places, including their financial situation. So let's take a look before my last slide. Let me see if I can access the chat. I cannot. Oh, yes, I can. Here we go. So let's look at what some of the examples of abuse are, financial abuse that some of you have seen. So using the survivor's conditions to get funds or benefits that they use for themselves. Yes, this is really common. And I just talked about survivors that have a disability. So this can very much be exploited and abused by a partner or an abuser. Purposely attempting to devalue a property before sale in a divorce agreement. Oh, that is terrible, but absolutely financial abuse. And so this would be because they wanted that person to receive less money for that property. Using their identity to gain credit, absolutely. Not paying bills. Not paying bills is very, very common. If there is a sexual assault, abusive situation that's happening between two partners that share finances. The survivors don't want to leave the husband because he is the one who works and provides everything for the family in the house. So Sonia, thanks for bringing that up, because there are ways to remedy that, but a lot of survivors don't know that. But there are ways that our attorneys in divorce and peace and protective orders can help remedy that. But that is very common. Like, they don't have a financial income of their own. So absolutely. Charging school loans to survivors so they would be responsible for it. Oh, absolutely. And school loans are school loans. It's you do not get out of them. You have to pay them back. Excellent. These are great examples. So I want to move on to just my last slide before I turn it over to Claire. And this is a statement from CalCASA, the California Coalition, which is now called Valor US. In their 2017 guide on an intersectional approach to ending sexual violence, they made this insightful statement about economic justice. And so I like to read it out loud so that we can really kind of hear a little bit more about the experience of survivors. So the economic burden for survivors of sexual assault is real. Women at the margins are the ones who bear the brunt of the harshest realities, including sexual violence, and they do so with the least resources. The most vulnerable communities facing poverty and economic hardship, as well as sexual violence, are dealing with a compounding and layering of burdens that impact basic needs, their ability to feed, clothe, and shelter themselves and their families. Services need to provide the comprehensive and flexible support that these survivors need. And again, I want to point out, they talk in this statement about women. This statement is 8 years old. I think in our environment now and our experience at MCASA, we would include all survivors, not just women survivors experiencing this economic hardship, and to be comprehensive and flexible with our support to meet all the needs of all the survivors that we work with. So with that, I want to turn it over to Claire to get more into some of the skill building necessary and appropriate for working with survivors related to economic safety. So Claire, it is to you.
Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who has been active in the chat as well. You all have had some amazing contributions. So next we're gonna start discussing starting the conversation about economic safety, advocacy, and independence. So before we explore the steps within this conversation and some of the different methods for navigating those steps, I just want to acknowledge that similar to many other aspects of our work, these conversations are not one size fits all. So, in order to have a conversation that is worthwhile for our clients and truly provides supportive guidance and builds on their strengths, we have to acknowledge what sort of things may impact their current financial state and what they may be looking for from us. So, this includes recognizing that there are a wide range of circumstances, needs, and goals, and acknowledging that just because we perceive something as urgent does not mean that it's a priority for the survivor. So we want to consider their safety and consider how that's integral to effective advocacy in all regards. And that remains integral in ensuring effective economic advocacy as well. So we need to remember that each client may react differently to the conversation and may need something different from you as their advocate. So, in order to kind of start this, I like to present 3 different client scenarios and ask that you all consider how the needs and priorities of each client may differ from one another. So, first we have client 1. They have no concerns about economic safety planning and do not wish to discuss any assistance relating to their financial state. They may find it insulting that we would initiate this conversation and are adamant that they are completely comfortable financially and do not want or need our help in that area. Then we have client 2, who identifies their experience as economic abuse. They may explain that they have been forced to sign financial documents without understanding what they were, and their abusive partner may have control of all of their earned wages. So they have shared assets, although the client is not sure if their name is included in anything, and they have children in common. They're not interested in pursuing anything involving criminal options, but are interested in exploring ways to increase economic and physical safety, as well as potential family law options. And then lastly, we have client 3. They've just physically left the home shared with an abusive party. They may have poor or no credit and are trying to begin saving money, but they're unsure where to start. So they may not use terms like economic or financial abuse to label their experiences specifically, but they would like to discuss options to assess their current financial state, increase their financial safety, and discuss family law options that might be available to them. And their current employment options are limited due to their immigration status, and they're unsure how to navigate risks after the abusive party previously threatened to use their immigration status against them. So for me, envisioning client scenarios just kind of presents a tangible way to display how wide of a variety of circumstances we may be presented with when we're exploring economic safety with our clients. As always, we want to be prepared to handle these and any other situations in an appropriate, client-focused, and trauma-informed way. So even if we think we have the quote unquote answer for a client, we need to remember that our job is to restore this person's agency over their own life and empower them to voice their needs and their wants and simply provide our knowledge and skills to assist them in reaching the goals and priorities that they've set for themselves. So the first step in this conversation is basically just an initial screening. So to begin the screening stage, you basically want to start by collecting information. Not all of these screening questions will look the same across different agencies. So as we continue exploring the stages of this conversation, you'll notice that I outlined some of the logistics to consider within each intake process or client conversations. I find it can be helpful to consider these things before you're actively in conversations with clients, but it is also an ongoing learning experience, which is always okay. So, in addition to being present during that conversation with a client, we want to also be mindful of what feels right and natural versus what may be feeling rushed or forced in these conversations. And then that way you can make adjustments moving forward just to refine how these practices take place within your specific role. So before we explore what questions can be asked to gather this information, as an advocate, I think it's important to know why we're asking these questions. So we want to think through, how is this relevant to our work? How can we use this information and work with this client to increase their safety or alleviate their concerns? And where does this conversation appropriately fit within our process? And we want to keep in mind there are a lot of reasons why someone might feel uncomfortable talking about their finances. So that adds an importance to making this feel as natural and as seamless as possible. So a suggestion I kind of have for this stage is structuring the conversation to center around them. As of now, the goal is to understand their current financial situation and understand where their concerns lie, what their priorities are in addressing those concerns, and anything else that they specifically think is important for us to know. Here, it can be really difficult to not let our own perspective of what needs to be addressed influence the questions that we ask. But just because something stands out to us doesn't mean that that's a priority for the client. So we obviously want to address urgent things, but also give them the space to share what they feel is important with us, even if it falls outside of that. So examples for this stage, we want to incorporate open-ended questions just to kind of allow for as much information as possible. These allow the client specifically to choose what they share with us and allows them the space to not feel like they're being led to a quote unquote correct answer. We also want to make sure that we center questions around the current impact of the situation on the client and focus on clarifying their goals and priorities when we're discussing things further. So a few questions specifically that can serve as ideas or inspiration. How is your situation with money impacting your safety? What are your biggest worries regarding money? Do you have any concerns about your financial situation impacting your access to safe housing, the stability of your income, or your employment at the moment? Do you have any financial concerns about your credit, identity theft, or any other matters you want to discuss today? So the next step is going to be continuing the conversation. And this just goes a bit beyond the initial information gathering. This is another stage where it's important to logistically assess where this appropriately fits into your interactions with the client. So you may want to think through, does this need to be separate from an initial intake? Are there urgent questions that we want to be sure to incorporate in initial information gathering and explore further later on? And then just generally kind of feeling out what makes the most sense within the context of your organization. And also understanding that the goal of this stage is to build context around the information that we've kind of gathered so far. So we're aiming to build an understanding of where this client is coming from, what factors may influence their outlook, what risks, strengths, and skills we should be considering, and what existing values the client may have surrounding money. And all of these things provide pretty critical insight to a survivor's values when it comes to money and how their personal experiences may impact where they might feel comfortable or uncomfortable moving forward. And these also give us an understanding of how people have helped and harmed this person using their finances. So that way we can be mindful of that, build protective factors if that's what the client wants, and cultivate a more trusting dynamic within our agencies. So, some examples for what we can ask during this stage are, what is important to you when it comes to money and why? Tell me more about your financial situation. What did you learn about money growing up, and how does that impact how you are with money now? When you have experienced financial hardship in the past, what have you done? What worked? Would you feel comfortable trying that again? What are your strengths when it comes to money? Who has hurt you in terms of your financial situation? Who has helped you? And how have they done that? And this information allows us to address economic safety in a way that aligns with this specific individual's values. It gives us a broader understanding of where this client is and how we can use their individual strengths, skills, and previous methods to guide safety planning and other strategies. So here I think it's important to reflect on the information they've shared with us so far, and what would be helpful to know moving forward. This ensures that we're taking into consideration all of the information they've been willing to share with us before asking them to share more information on this subject. And for me, I think while this is important in any interaction we have with survivors, I think it can be especially impactful in financial conversations because it does build some of that trust. It displays care in our services in showing that we're listening, we're understanding their specific situation, and we're not just trying to give them a one-size-fits-all solution. So, before we move on to an outline of how we can move forward with the information gathered, I want to take a moment to check in with you all. I know that's a lot of information and it can be a bit overwhelming, so I just wanted to check in. Feel free to respond in the chat. But do you all have any questions about how to approach starting a conversation with survivors about financial safety? Do you have any concerns about how and where this may logistically fit into your intake process? Or just does anyone have any thoughts or ideas that came up during this discussion that you would like to share? And it's okay if not. So I will give you all a minute just before we move on. Wonderful. Well, if anyone has any thoughts or questions or ideas that come up always feel free to post things in the chat. But for now, I will move on to the next little bit of my section. Oh, I see one thing. It can be hard for clients to talk about the extent of financial abuse, so working on creating key phrases or words, try and figure out the severity. Absolutely. Yeah, I think just like anything else, it's a vulnerable and difficult conversation to have. And in my experience through my advocacy, sometimes it's unexpected, which I think can make people feel especially vulnerable in that situation. So I think absolutely having at least a plan in place to kind of go back, recenter conversation if things get a bit, you know, tangential. I am someone who loves notes, and I think it's important to have natural and impromptu conversation basing it off of your dynamic with that survivor. But for me, it was always helpful to just kind of have almost kind of like a template to fall back to if it felt like things were getting a little bit off course. Um, Obviously, we will always share these PowerPoints with you. Alyssa will reach out with the slides after today. But yeah, just kind of having a general plan in mind can be helpful. Absolutely. And then when you're talking about finances, it should be approached carefully. Absolutely. And that's kind of what I'm hoping to explore a little bit today is some of the basic things of how to actually approach financial safety, but also how to do that in the context of trauma-informed services and still centering around advocacy and taking into account that you're not just talking finances with anyone, you're talking about finances with someone who has already endured a traumatic experience and in a situation where it's extremely critical to offer a place of empowerment and control over the decisions that they're making. Wonderful. Thank you all so much. All right. So next, we're going to explore some practices associated with financial or economic safety planning. For this section, I like to take a second to revisit the basic definition of safety planning. So the important things to note about the definition of safety planning is that it is individualized, it's developed in partnership, and it addresses the unique needs and circumstances of individual survivors. As a reminder, we cannot guarantee safety in any scenario. And often we're collaborating on these safety plans because a survivor is in an inherently unsafe environment. Our goal is always to work with the client towards becoming more safe. So in economic safety planning, these goals and principles remain the same. We are just centering around economic safety in that conversation. And this can always be developed as a facet of a more general, overarching safety plan as well. And that's, if your organization already has a process where that would fit in nicely. If you don't, that's okay too. You can always figure out, take those reflecting questions and figure out, okay, where does this feel most natural in the conversations that I am having with survivors? And kind of figuring out how to integrate that in the most natural way possible. So the goal in economic safety planning is fairly simple. We're just working towards becoming economically safer by offering knowledge and tools to support a survivor's ability to work towards their own safety, prioritize the concerns and precautions that they feel are most critical to them, and restoring that survivor's sense of agency and control over their financial independence. So for those goals to be achieved, an economic safety plan should address a wide range of safety needs for that survivor, work to reduce the survivor's economic risks based on their values, their goals, priorities, and strengths, and then also focus on increasing a survivor's self-determination. So before we can create a safety plan tailored to a client, we need to understand the risks that they're experiencing or those that apply to their situation. So we want to discuss what risks you can identify from the information you have so far, and then check what feels accurate or inaccurate to the survivor. So this should include discussing risks associated with the abusive party themselves, whether those are physical, psychological, sexual, economic. They could include access to medical care, property, children, or any threats to the safety of the survivor or children. And then also general life risks. So things like experiencing isms, living in poverty, mental health challenges they may be facing, employment obstacles, substance abuse, education barriers, and then just generally addressing with the survivor which of these feel the most important and what feels the most present in their situation. We also want to address fears and priorities that the client may have. So I feel like I've said the word natural a lot throughout this, but having a natural conversation about what scares them or intimidates them about this process and addressing, can we alleviate that fear in any way while maintaining their safety? Or considering, is something that we're proposing maybe not a safe option for this person? And ultimately making sure that their priorities are clear. We can always confirm that what we understand still feels accurate to the survivor. Regardless of where we are in this process, this can and should be an ongoing conversation. And we also want to talk through what resources generally may be accessible to them. So identify what resources are available to them, whether those are economic, housing, community-based, what resources exist in themselves. So maybe pulling up what information we have on the skills we've discussed with them. How can we use those skills to increase safety? What are their strengths? How can we use those to build more resources? What options have already been ruled out or they've informed us they're not comfortable accessing moving forward? And then I also just wanted to include examples of personal and community resources. Personal, these can be things like skills that might create opportunity, whether it's an opportunity for income or an opportunity to create a situation where they can have access to housing in return for a skill or craft or a service they can offer. Strengths that may help build resources or any methods that they have used previously that worked well. They don't have to be life-changing. They can be small things that help them alleviate their stress in any area that offers a little bit more mental space to approach their financial situation. And then community resources can be things like storage, housing, support, partnerships. Ultimately, this is an area where our job as advocates is to be able to be creative in an informed way. There are a lot of different scenarios that offer a lot of different obstacles. So recognizing, okay, we have a resource person here that we're comfortable asking for something. They can't offer housing. Can they maybe offer a place where we can store furniture so that those items aren't lost, or store clothes so that those items aren't lost? Um, Things like that. Yeah. And then just a quick note before we move on to specific steps in safety planning that take action towards safety and security. I just wanted to include a reminder that even though these are intended as steps to increase safety, they are not always safe. So the safety of each option needs to be assessed on an individual basis during the conversation of risks and safety. And then, as we mentioned, continuously discussed throughout the development and execution of a safety plan. So if a client does not feel like it is safe, then it's not safe. We cannot make that determination for them, and we need to be able to work within the safety of their situation and adapt to their needs. So I'm going to break this down into a few different categories, but the first is just kind of surrounding bank accounts. So we should be creating an individualized safety plan regarding financial safety and security. For bank accounts, this may mean things like closing joint bank accounts shared with an abusive party, securing existing bank accounts by changing passwords or PIN numbers, changing passwords on cellular devices, computers, and other accounts, being sure to review how to access accounts if they're locked out, and just creating new bank accounts if that's something that's necessary. We also want to be sure to address safety as it relates to financial documents. If possible, financial documents should be gathered and put in a safe place. But if an abusive party is in possession of these documents, we can always assess with the survivor whether or not it's safe to gather those or to make copies. And if the client is able to collect those documents, we want to be sure to collaborate on a safe location for them to be stored. So for this, we want to be sure it's not only a location safe from the abusive party, but also a generally safe place for financial information to be stored. And that may mean discussing with a survivor what that looks like and why that may be important. And that may not be possible for their situation. So just finding out, where is the safest place we can store this information, where are they most comfortable with this information being stored. And then if there are any missing documents, this can also be a good place to offer tools and information on how to replace those missing documents. Another thing that's important to focus on is savings. So if access to financial resources is a concern, we want to discuss potential ways that a client might be able to start saving money. So we can discuss what ways they might be able to start saving even the smallest amount in a safe place. We want to also navigate risks and safety and revisit some of the concerns that the survivor may have mentioned in earlier discussions. These will look different based on an abusive party's level of access to the client and other risks that apply to their individual circumstances. But this is also a great place to get creative with the client and to take advantage of some of the strengths and skills that we discussed previously. And then also here, finding a safe place to store savings, whether that's a bank, a friend, family member, secure location, whatever that looks like for the client. And then developing a plan if there is a risk that the savings may be discovered by the abusive party as well. Another pretty crucial aspect of financial safety planning is addressing the survivor's cost of living and basic needs. So, collaborating on a cost of living plan that the client can stick to and that will help them meet their basic needs. So, we want that plan to be realistic and meet the true needs of a client. Everyone's priorities and needs look different, but this budget and plan is really only helpful if you're able to have an honest conversation with that survivor to ensure that all of their needs are being considered. Also, if they currently live with an abuser, making two budgets may be a good idea. One for expenses while living with that person and one for living independently. That way, if circumstances were to change, there's no delay in them having a method for approaching their finances within that new situation. This is another place where it's also incredibly helpful to loop back to what resources this person may have access to and what resources they feel safe and comfortable using. So consider and provide information for community resources that could assist in meeting some of these needs, specifically without additional expense for the client. And then also considering safe relationships, whether that's friends, family, anyone who may be able to provide additional assistance or support. And obviously discussing if the survivor is comfortable with that. If they're not comfortable with reaching out to anyone else for any assistance, kind of discussing how we can work to either mitigate some of that fear or discomfort or to navigate alternative solutions and options. Lastly, discussing any additional precautions that may be relevant to the client situation. So, exploring these options and determining the relevant additional steps based on the client's needs. These could include things like opening a credit line to use in emergencies, reviewing, assessing, and monitoring credit reports for any suspicious activity, discussing the risks associated with credit checks through landlords, banking institutions, when taking out loans, things like that, disputing any coerced or unknown charges and accounts, and disputing identity theft charges or accounts associated with identity theft. This specifically may require reporting to law enforcement or the IRS. So, if that's something that the client expresses interest in, you may just want to have an additional conversation regarding the risks and comfort level with that additional step as well. And then additionally, sometimes these conversations may include the client wanting to speak to an attorney, specifically to explore potential legal remedies to economic, safety, or other concerns. And these can relate to things like protective orders, divorce, custody, criminal proceedings, immigration, or employment. We will, of course, include Sally's information at the end of this presentation as well. But if your agency does not have attorneys in office, just generally considering fostering a relationship with other legal organizations in the community, like Sally, so that there can be an opportunity for either warm handoffs to explore legal options, or just general guidance on, hey, if we had a client that's facing a housing law matter, is that something that you all handle, or is there another organization that you're aware of that may be able to offer resources with this? Generally, building those relationships can be really helpful. And then also, if there's something that you can't come to a solution on how to address or mitigate, collaborating with other advocates and attorneys allows you to kind of like get creative and see what you all can come up with. The amount that I have learned from reaching out to other advocates with other organizations or advocates that were my colleagues is immeasurable. They always surprise me with their creativity, and we don't have relationships with everyone throughout the state. So being able to brainstorm with someone else who may have gained information from a third person is only going to benefit your knowledge as an advocate and your ability to serve each individual survivor. And then I also just wanted to provide one note here is have an ongoing conversation with the client to make sure that they're feeling like their safety plan is still relevant and it's still working for them. And also just checking in to make sure they don't need any additional support, either making alterations or discussing how this may adapt with any changes in their situation. And that could be changes in their situation relating to an abusive party, or it could simply be, I've been working in the budget that we created and I feel like it's not sustainable for me because I feel like I'm not meeting my needs in this area, or I'm feeling uncomfortable with how we've set this up. It doesn't feel super stable to me, doesn't feel super sustainable for me. How can we alter that? Just having a check-in, whether it's brief or more in depth, just to make sure that that's still effective for them. All right, so similar to our check-in for information gathering, before we move on to our group discussion, I just wanted to take a moment to check in with you all. Are there any questions or concerns you have regarding building an economic safety plan or discussing the options for working towards economic safety with clients? And also, if anyone has any thoughts, ideas that came up during our exploration of steps towards economic safety, please feel welcome to share those as well in the chat. All right. Absolutely. So I'm going back. There were a few messages in the chat from earlier. So someone said we have to face the fact that most victims don't identify as victims or haven't realized they're a victim in a situation, and we can't simply tell them they're victims of one abuse or another. Absolutely. I That's something that I ran into a lot in my advocacy work, and people handle those situations entirely differently. And how they choose to label their own lived experiences is entirely up to them. In my experience, in order to provide effective advocacy, I don't need to enforce one label or another on a survivor's experiences. All I need to do is be able to work with them however they want to work together with regard to that situation, and whether or not they choose to label their experiences as one thing or another doesn't inhibit my ability to provide effective advocacy. So someone asked about how to handle if the bank does not allow closing an account if the other member is not present. Um, I will look into if there's specific procedures that multiple institutions follow. I'll talk to Steph about reaching out to you with specific information. I don't want to misspeak. Generally, I think that there can be procedures that go around another member not being present, but I would have to double check. Um, for immigrants or undocumented folks, it is even harder. Absolutely. Immigration status or not having documentation absolutely does increase the difficulty of some of these things. We had a bank come to one of our TV events. They said to open a child's account to continue to deposit money to aid when they move or need help. Talk to a bank manager. Yeah, absolutely. Cynthia, did you have another question or comment?
No, I just wanted to let you guys know that we did have a bank that came to one of our DV events. Most of banks do have procedures that they will help any victim. They will assist you if you explain to them that you need to get your name off an account because of your situation, and they will let you also open an account under a child's name. So that way you can start depositing small bits of money specifically when they're ready to leave through the safety plan. That way the money can assist them if they have to go to an apartment or they have to do anything. They're able to remove a certain amount of the money and they're saving up. And the bank will help them with that. The suggestion the bank had, though, was if you feel like your city, your husband or wife or whatever knows a lot of people in the city to go to another location or call a bank, and then they will assist you with that. Our main thing is to be able to have them have some kind of fund that they're able to put aside, even if it's $5, even if it's $2, but the bank will help them out with all of it. They have procedures.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah, that's my understanding as well. And even as advocates, that's something we can do to help if we need to reach out to a different bank to see if there are different options or different procedures that they follow. But to know that there are processes like that, and specifically the tip about either calling in or going to a different location is also super helpful because I know a lot of survivors exist in small towns or just generally have concerns about that person having connections that can alleviate some of that stress. So that's great information to have. Thank you so much for sharing. Someone else said it can be hard for them to come to terms with the fact that they've experienced financial abuse or know exactly their options. So it's important. Absolutely. This is for every bank. Um, Wonderful. I think I got everything. If anyone has something that I missed, please let me know. Um, Privacy or running. Absolutely. Someone mentioned, sorry, I didn't voice as I was reading. Someone mentioned potential privacy concerns regarding cashing in-person checks and having identifying information about where that check is cashed. Um, Absolutely, I agree with that. And I think that this is another reason it can be beneficial to have connections with community agencies, even if they're outside of advocacy or direct advocacy work, having a connection where you can reach out to them and discuss, hey, I have a client. We're facing specific safety concerns, obviously not disclosing personal information, but if we're facing these concerns, is cashing a check, does that potentially cause any concerns regarding location or disclosing where that check was cashed or anything like that? If that's information you don't know, you're always able to reach out to different financial institutions and check with them specifically, whether about their procedures or different concerns that arise in different situations. Yeah, absolutely. Cynthia said building those trusted connections to work with your organization. Wonderful. Well, please feel free to continue sharing in the chat. Thank you so much for contributing. It's always helpful to hear everyone's different experiences and hear what others have heard from other resources. All right. So, to initiate the process of collaborating with one another and learning from advocates working alongside us, we wanted to kind of wrap up this section of our presentation by asking you all a few questions relating to your experiences working to build economic empowerment for survivors. So, same thing, you can either post in the chat or raise your hand. For the first, how have you all started the conversation surrounding financial needs, and how have you used that to create a plan of action? And obviously, this is going to look different across different organizations based on the population you're serving or the services you're providing. And there are always a lot of resources and that we're aware of and connected with. And as we've already shown, new resources that we can gain and learn from by collaborating with one another as well. I will give you all a minute while I take a sip of my water.
And Claire, as people are putting stuff in the chat, I can share a story when I did direct service work that kind of speaks to a couple of things folks have already put in the chat. But I worked for a DVSA organization. I did a lot of volunteer work for them in addition to my job working as an advocate someplace else. And they had kind of this legendary story. I did not get to meet this woman, but a woman came in to their shelter. Um, she was in her late 60s and she had not been employed outside the home for her entire relationship with her abusive partner, which had lasted more than 40 years. So in the 30 days she was at the shelter, multiple people had approached her at appropriate times asking her about finances, like if she had concerns, starting these conversations, much like Claire talked about, not labeling her as being financially abused. So I'm glad someone brought that up in the chat. But trying to start that conversation. And each time she was like, nope, I'm good. I don't need to talk about that, which might be a reaction you get from survivors. And that's totally legitimate. If they don't want to talk about their finances, we're not going to push that. We just want to make sure that they know we're available. And so finally, as they got closer and closer to the time that she would be exiting the shelter, they did bring it up again. And she was like, no, I have $327,000. And they were shocked. They'd been working with this woman for weeks and weeks and weeks, right? She had not mentioned this money at all. And they were like, oh, so you do have $327,000. That's very exact. Before she went into the shelter, she went into her and her spouse's joint account and took out exactly half to the penny because that's what she felt like she deserved. And then she was able to then use that money beyond that. So I think that's a great example of ways that like you don't really know what a survivor's financial situation is until they want to start talking about it. And that's when we can start engaging in those conversations. So this woman was legendary. Now, when she took out that money, she must have felt safe to do so because as many of you know, that can be a dangerous situation if you would do something like that because um the abusive partner may know about that very, very, very immediately and take some kind of harmful action. But that was not this woman's case. And then she was able to use that money to establish a new residence and a new situation and a safer situation for herself. But I always like telling that story of that legendary woman who just took out 50% of what their savings was, and then was able to use that money. So she did her own safety planning in that instance, but it's a fun story to share. And she was really able to use those funds to support herself.
That's amazing. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's an incredible example of not, making the assumption because we don't know. At the end of the day, we don't know if this person is struggling, is not struggling. We don't know what past experiences may contribute to their current financial state, whether that's an abundance or absence of resources. So definitely approaching that conversation from a place of curiosity and just looking for insight from the survivor is, from my perspective, always the right way. Um, you know, at the end of the day, they are the experts of their own situation. And we can't provide effective and individualized advocacy without seeking that information from them. But that's awesome. Okay, so someone mentioned fi within military advocacy, sometimes that financial support comes from commander leadership. Um, oh, sorry, it refreshed on me and I got pushed down. Okay. Yeah, so sometimes there are going to be other resources within your organization that may be better suited. Sometimes it's worth, if you're having that conversation, kind of mentally noting, okay, this concern is something that I can relay this person through a warm handoff to another branch of our organization or a sister organization to get more thorough support with. sometimes, dependent on your role, it may be worth having the rest of that conversation to make sure that there's not an area that you're able to offer direct support with. But yeah, absolutely. Knowing who can assist with what options specifically is always helpful to provide informed advocacy and equipping that person with all of the information they need about where they're able to seek those services.
So I really like what Toby wrote in the chat as well about sharing the knowledge without knowing if they need the resources can open up the door. And I can't stress this enough in advocacy. You don't have to know every detail of a survivor's story for you to be able to start some conversations and offer some resources. So in this case, financial resources, but any resources. Sometimes they don't have the words or they aren't ready to talk, but you know some things you can share with them, and that might be, and then they can apply that to their situation as they see fit. So thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, absolutely. That is a great point, Steph. Thank you for mentioning that. I agree with that. Sometimes also people may have, hinted at situations while you're doing an intake, but they don't want to delve into things further. There have been situations where, the intake itself may have been a lot for a survivor to go through, but in my advocacy brain, I'm like, there may be, a financial situation or there may be a housing situation, but I know that they don't have the energy to fully delve into that conversation right now. I may ask, are you comfortable with me sending you some resources? I'll send you a little breakdown of what each one is. These are some resources that other survivors I've worked with have found helpful. And just like Steph mentioned, and just like Toby mentioned, giving them the tools, the access to information, just to kind of have them at their disposal, whether they choose to or not. Um, and, empowering them to make that decision on their own without forcing them into a conversation they may not want to have, which is completely okay. Wonderful. Shared a book called How Money Works and also taking the class gives you skills that will help your survivors. You. It will also help with skills to aid your survivors before they leave and help foster and assist with their safety plan. That's great. Yeah, absolutely. I think too, like, not all resources have to be tailored to survivors of violence or have to be tailored to victim advocacy specifically. Obviously, if there's an option for a trauma-informed conversation and client-centered conversation, that's always going to be beneficial. But these are also just people. So if it's just another person looking for more information on how the heck to approach finances, period. Things like, basic text to review or a book that's been helpful for you as a person. Those resources are also helpful things to share. Start by offering resources to get the conversation started, which will lead to other options. Yeah, absolutely. Knowing the resources available in your community can be a lifesaver for a victim requiring services. Absolutely. Wonderful. Thank you all so much. Those are amazing responses. Um, on that note, actually a great segue. Thank you. What resources have you all used or organizations have you referred to a survivor to in Maryland that were helpful and effective? And I'll kind of let you all send those in the chat as we discuss our next slide. Um, that is kind of on a similar note. So, another wonderful resource for community information is Maryland 211. So, whether you're offering their information to survivors or using it yourself, once you've kind of discussed what type of resources may be helpful to your client, you can call or visit their website for access to a wide array of community organizations that you may be unaware of. Um, and this can kind of help establish a more well-rounded community support network for survivors who are looking for things like victim services, legal services, resources for folks experiencing homelessness, shelters and housing assistance, departments of human services, mental health providers, campus health providers, substance use treatment centers, and recovery programs. And one thing I like to note here is it can also be helpful to just reach out to them if you notice that there's an area of services that you're not super familiar with. And I've reached out to other advocates just kind of proactively, being like, hey, I was talking to a colleague about a case involving, you know, someone that was experiencing houselessness. And I realized I'm not super familiar with partners that have services that address those concerns. Do you have anyone you work with that you really enjoy? Or do you have anyone that you work with that survivors have mentioned provide really effective services? Um, just kind of building that list of organizations and those connections, maybe even before they're needed, can be really helpful. Wonderful. So obviously there are a myriad of financial legal remedies depending on the facts of the situation. So we did want to just plug Sally's information. Um, Sally advocates can help with financial safety planning, and their attorneys can offer legal consultations that will help kind of identify any legal remedies that might be relevant for a survivor. So we provided Sally's information on this slide. I just kind of wanted to go over a few things that Sally offers services for. So for criminal legal advocacy, they can assist with things like requesting and receiving results of HIV and Hep C testing, setting release conditions for safety concerns, assisting with privacy, whether that's requesting that contact and other personal information is confidential, assisting with criminal injury compensation board claim pursuance for financial remedies. And then also, they provide assistance with different civil services for survivors as well. Those include things like peace and protective orders, privacy matters, housing issues, like a termination of lease, like Steph mentioned earlier, employment law matters, primary and secondary school issues or Title IX proceedings, immigration proceedings, including VAWA self-petitions, U visas, and T visas, family law matters, and then referrals for tort cases, and of course, safety planning.
So I know we only have a few minutes left, or a few seconds left, but I did want to put this slide up here, which Alyssa will be sending out so you can look at it more detailed then. Sally, the Sexual Assault Legal Institute did a Money Matters series that's available on our YouTube page. So particularly if you are an attorney or a legal advocate, or you want to know more about how the law can help empower survivors economically, please check this training out. There's a lot of good information. Each one of these sessions is about 30 minutes long. So also if you are working with kind of folks that are engaged in family law or housing and public benefits, you could just watch one of them and still just get the information that is most relevant to your advocacy. We also want to leave you with a takeaway. So Claire did an exceptional job, as always, filling your toolbox with a lot of resources and tools that you can use with survivors. So think of one thing, a question or a resource or a tool that you will use in your conversations with advocates about money. So that's what we're going to leave you with today. So again, thank you so much to Claire for joining us for this training. We're so glad we had the opportunity to spend this morning with you talking about this really important issue. And I'll turn it back over to Alyssa to wrap us up.
Thank you. Yes, thank you both for this wonderful presentation. So I put the evaluation link into the chat. Again, we greatly appreciate all feedback as we're constantly striving to improve. If you are seeking a certificate of attendance or a certificate for CEU credits, you must complete the evaluation form to gain access to the certificate request form. And again, if you're in the military and you're having trouble accessing the evaluation due to firewalls or anything like that, feel free to email me and we'll do a workaround. I'll be sending a follow-up email later today with a copy of the PowerPoint slides, all of the resources that were mentioned in the training today, as well as the evaluation link and today's video recording. So thank you all again for coming today, and we hope to see you tomorrow.